everyone, my name is Seto, and this will be my project on the Kiefer Creek Restoration Assessment. Kiefer Creek is located in St. Louis County, Missouri. The watershed includes both urban areas in the northern reaches, as well as suburban areas and portions of the protected Castlewood State Park in the southern reaches of the creek. The main causes of stream degradation are urbanization in the northern areas of the stream as well as climate change, both of which have contributed to increased flashiness and increased flooding frequencies. Through restoration, the goal of a few Castlewood State Park restoration efforts was to reduce erosion, improve bacteria levels, and improve overall recreation and safety for the general public as well as surrounding wildlife. This restoration effort took place during the summer of 2020 and included a natural bank stabilization, so they just used natural materials to reinforce the existing banks, as well as the installation of a riparian buffer zone, which involves planting grasses and trees alongside the river to improve water quality, reduce runoff, and further reinforce the stream banks. Ultimately, the goal of this assessment is to determine the success of these restoration efforts in addressing local channel instability and improving aquatic conditions, as well as make some recommendations for future work. A few different methods will be used for this assessment project. First, observed trends in upstream urbanization as well as climate change will be used to assess the changes in Kiefer Creek over time. The discharge rates from the USGS National Water Information System site will be used to observe daily and yearly discharge data, as well as analyze the trends over time. The location of this specific stream gauge can be seen in the image in the upper right-hand corner. Recorded E. coli bacteria levels will be assessed and observed for different trends over time. And finally, a restoration assessment will be performed through fieldwork to gauge the health of a newly installed riparian buffer zone, as well as identify areas for future restoration work. Before we get into too much detail, I would like to provide a little bit of context about the general region. Most of Missouri, especially the St. Louis area, has a limestone bedrock. Limestone is a soluble type of rock that can be relatively easily affected by water, especially when the water is acidic, which can be caused by high pollution levels. In Kiefer Creek specifically, the river will actually flow underground in many of the suburban areas, only failing to flow above ground during floods or during the summer when rain is more consistent. The contrast between the upstream bed, where the river flows underground, which can be seen in the left image, a more central location in Kiefer Creek, where the stream is consistently above ground, is the center image, and downstream in Castlewood State Park, where restoration efforts have been completed, is seen in the image on the right. So there's a pretty large range of the different environments of Kiefer Creek throughout its flow. All of these images and observations were completed in March of 2021, approximately 6 to 9 months after these restoration efforts were completed. Restoration work was completed at Kiefer Creek during the summer of 2020. This project worked to restore eroded stream banks and install a riparian buffer zone over a few hundred feet of Kiefer Creek located within Castlewood State Park. The goal of this project is to reduce bacteria levels, reduce erosion, and make the stream banks more resilient to flooding. Although it would be ideal to restore all of Kiefer Creek in this way, politically it is not easily accessible since the residential and commercial areas of Kiefer Creek come with many more constraints. Improving the water quality of Kiefer Creek will allow for additional biodiversity, improved water quality, and provide a more enjoyable experience for visitors to Castlewood State Park. This is where the bulk of restoration efforts have previously been completed and is the most viable location for further restoration efforts. Stakeholders to these projects not only include the local community, but groups such as the Nature Conservatory, Missouri Department of Natural Resources, and Missouri State Parks. To begin the analysis, this is the daily discharge plot for Kiefer Creek. This plot represents the average flow over each day starting in 1996. The largest recorded average daily flow rate was 302 cubic feet per second. However, the average daily flow rate over the entire recorded time period was 5.92 cubic feet per second. So as you can see, for the trends over time, in the first about 10 to 15 years, there were fairly frequent flooding events. However, as you move to the second half of the graph, those flooding events, while not necessarily increasing in magnitude, increase quite significantly in frequency. So you see taller spikes in this plot more frequently. Building off of the daily discharge plot on the last slide, this is the average annual discharge. So all of the discharge that was measured over the entire year averaged out, which kind of just gives you a better overall picture compared to the daily discharge plot that just has so much going on. So overall, the average flow rate in Kiefer Creek has had a gradual increase over time. If correlated to a linear trend line, this data corresponds to a 0.098 cubic feet per second increase per year. Although this is not a huge change over a decadal timeline, these small trends can become very significant, and this is fairly noticeable in the condition of Kiefer Creek. The last discharge plot that we will look at is the annual maximum flood peak series. Unlike the last two plots, this is an instantaneous measurement, not averaged over a period of time. This measurement has increased quite noticeably over the past 5 years, which is one of the biggest reasons why erosion has become a much bigger issue and something that requires restoration efforts compared to the historical trends. Moving on to an analysis of the bacteria levels in Kiefer Creek. The bacteria levels are difficult to quantify because they correspond very closely to the current instantaneous discharge rate. The data in the bacteria assessment report for Kiefer Creek only has approximately 8 years of E. coli data. Due to the reliance on instantaneous discharge rate and how different the discharge rate was at each measurement, it's very difficult to evaluate an overall trend with the current data set. However, the majority of Kiefer Creek has been evaluated to have unsafe bacteria levels according to the Clean Water Act and is not safe for local wildlife or tourists. However, on a positive note, some studies have shown that riparian barriers, even over very short spans, can help to reduce E. coli levels. Specifically, one study showed that over a half mile, there was a 30% reduction in E. coli concentration. The most significant sources of E. coli in the watershed are from suburban septic systems and equine activities. A long-term solution would be to increase the use of composting systems and improve waste management systems that could reduce the input levels of bacteria to Kiefer Creek. As a treatment to the existing levels of bacteria, the installation of additional riparian buffer zones within Castlewood State Park and the surrounding urban areas could dramatically improve bacterial levels, potentially even to safe swimming levels. Although the bacteria levels in Kiefer Creek are very difficult to form an assessment on due to limited data, the visual changes of the restoration efforts are much more dramatic. In this project, restoration efforts were extremely localized to a few areas that were heavily restored and reinforced, while other areas were left untouched. The areas of Kiefer Creek that are not restored frequently appear like the area shown to the right, where, depending on the curvature of the creek, the outer edge has either experienced excessive erosion due to the centripetal acceleration of the water as it flows around the bend, and the opposite bank is very wide and shallow, and this is where the majority of sediment will be deposited. So there's a very large disconnect between the two sides, one that has a very sharp drop-off and one that is very gradual, both of which are quite unstable. Completed restoration efforts focused on using natural materials to reinforce the stream bed. The steep bank has been slightly graded through the use of natural materials as well as plant life, and the shallow bank has been stabilized to reduce the excessive sedimentation transport during flooding events that could eventually lead up to buildup downstream. The stream banks of Kiefer Creek have been successfully restored to a more stable configuration. In March of 2021, it was observed that there is beginning to have native plant life growing on top of the restored area, which will only serve to further stabilize the stream bank. The grasses and trees that were planted continue to thrive and form a riparian buffer that will help to reduce runoff and improve water quality. The shallow side of a restored area of Kiefer Creek can be seen in the image to the right. It is important that natural materials are used for this project so that the local plant life will begin to take the place of the restored material and produce self-sustaining support. If artificial or foreign materials had been used, there would be too much maintenance and damage to the local ecosystem and wildlife compared to using natural materials that will be self-sustaining. Overall, the restoration efforts that were completed through the summer of 2020 appear to be extremely successful. As the summer progresses, the surrounding plants will continue to reinforce the established riparian buffer zone and support its mechanisms. The structure of the stream is much better prepared for the increased flooding and discharge rates that Kiefer Creek has been experiencing due to upstream urbanization and climate change. Continued restoration efforts, likely within Castlewood State Park, would only help to improve the quality of Kiefer Creek for both local human populations as well as animal populations. In conclusion, increased urbanization and climate changes have caused the daily average and maximum discharge rates in Kiefer Creek to rise significantly. This corresponds to heightened erosion rates as well as unhealthy levels of E. coli in Kiefer Creek. The restoration efforts that were completed during the summer of 2020 have and will continue to help remedy these issues. Through fieldwork, it was observed that the established trees and plant life are becoming more healthy and better integrated with the surrounding areas. The physical reinforcements to the stream corridor are beginning to encourage natural growth within the riparian buffer zone that will only improve with time. While overall these efforts were extremely successful, it will be even more beneficial if this work is continued to larger regions of Kiefer Creek. Specifically, improvements to the stream bed within Castlewood State Park would be the most realistic area to focus on. However, there could also be significant benefits to restoring areas further upstream if that was possible. Finally, this is a list of references that were used in the completion of this project. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation and hope you have a great day.